I'm Pat. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Campbell, the Program Development Division Manager, Office of Employment and Training at the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I'm joined by two colleagues, Jennifer Foyle from Northern Illinois University. She's our DCO consultant, working primarily with state apprenticeship initiatives. And Jennifer Phillips from Illinois State University. She is a DCO consultant as well. And a third colleague is John Barr. He is Budget and Planning Manager, Office of Employment and Training, Department of Commerce, and will be presenting the second half of this webinar on pre-award and submission requirements. This webinar will walk us through the purpose of the Notice of Funding Opportunity and the grant submission requirements. It is for informational purposes only, and the Notice of Funding Opportunity is the guideline of record and should be referred to for any questions. We will be fielding questions via chat and plan to answer those at the end of each half of the presentation. Please note that the general agenda will be as follows. We'll do about 10 minutes on the context and background, which is critically important to all applicants to understand this as the foundation for all potential applicants, to submit by. And it's so critical that they understand this background information. We'll do about 15 minutes on slides 11 through 22, the grant program approaches, and as refined by the Apprenticeship Committee, work groups, and current grantees. We'll do about 10 minutes on slides 23 through 29, which are grantee requirements, about 10 minutes on slides 30 through 37 on the elements in the competitive proposal, and 15 minutes on the slides 38 through 44, the bidders conference timelines, resources, etc. And then John Barr will take the second half, and he will be presenting on slides 39 through 80, which is Grants 101 and the government accountability, the GATA information. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, David. Next slide. Okay, so this slide is very important. This is the landing page. Please bookmark this. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on to the Illinois WorkNet website. So you'll see this. You can listen to this webinar again if you need to, or if you have someone that's interested in this, you can refer them to that and they can revisit this webinar. The NOFO website is your go-to resource. Everything referenced today and within the Notice of Funding Opportunity is available on this web page, and we hope to have a few minutes to take a closer look at this at the end of the first half of this presentation.
Next slide, please. Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer Foyle. I want you to know when we put this NOFO together, we intentionally aligned it with the state's overarching workforce goals. So it's aligned with the State Unified Plan, with the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board's Apprenticeship Committee's work plan, and then also the Governor's Executive Order number 3 Action Agenda Report. Specifically in the Governor's Action Agenda Report, it does call out that we should prepare Illinois workers for a career, not just their next job, and that's where apprenticeship fits in. So your proposals should align with these state workforce goals, and so we want you to demonstrate a solid understanding of what these goals are, and let us, in your proposal as you're putting it together, you do have references to these in the NOFO as well as on that landing page that Patrick just showed you. Just to let you know, also, we're funding this through a grant we got with the U.S. Department of Labor, so it's a federal grant, along with some of DCO's statewide activity funds. So this allows us for a little greater flexibility. Next slide, please.
Okay. This slide refers primarily to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and they've developed a talent pipeline management approach to address chronic national skill gaps. Skill gaps exist where there is a disconnect between what skills businesses want new employees to have when hired and the actual skills of applicant pools. The talent pipeline management uses supply chain principles to call on business and public policy leaders to transform education and workforce systems to be employer-led and business demand-driven. Talent pipeline management is an overarching systemic approach intended to help businesses better understand their short and long-term talent needs and to help public education and workforce programs adapt as demand for skills evolve. An important note, this is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Talent Pipeline Management, which is a strategy and a foundation in which Illinois is utilizing a training approach to maximize state consistency and messaging to meet talent needs and to help public education and workforce programs adapt as the demand for skills evolve. Please do not confuse this with the Illinois Talent Pipeline Management Grants for Layoff Aversion, which is a grant program through another funding opportunity with the Office of Employment and Training, Department of Commerce. So please note the separation. We don't want applications going and studying the notice of funding opportunity for our Illinois Talent Pipeline Management Grant.
Next slide, please. So apprenticeships are just one work-based learning strategy that leads to a career pathway for individuals. It gives them, it provides individuals with just a clear pathway. And because it provides them with this structured process and framework for the apprentice to advance their skills and knowledge and competencies, it does require more from the employers, as you see here on this continuum. So of all the different work-based learning strategies, apprenticeship is the one that requires more employer engagement. Because more is needed from the employer, employer engagement is key to all successful apprenticeship programs. So just career pathways, we got this out of the dictionary, the Career Pathways Dictionary. This is notice at the bottom too of your slides, the left-hand bottom corner, it shows which page on the NOFO we're referencing. And so you can find out more about the Career Pathways Dictionary by through a link on the NOFO, but it's also on the landing page. So next slide, please. So there are 4 core elements to a registered apprenticeship program. You've got the related instruction. Sometimes it's called RTI, related technical instruction. Did I say 4? I meant 5. 5 core elements. Related technical instruction. This can be done in a classroom. It could be online. It could be in a conference room like we're in right now with a hired instructor. You've got the on-the-job training portion, that work-based learning. You've got the rewards for skill gain. So an apprentice is being paid while they're on the job learning, but then also as they're gaining more competencies, more knowledge and skills, as they are more productive, they can get paid. They should get paid more. Because you can bring an apprentice on at a lower level because their skills aren't where they need to be at the moment. By the end of an apprenticeship program, a registered apprenticeship program, they will receive a national credential from the U.S. Department of Labor, which is portable, meaning that if they got it here in Illinois, they could take it over to California and show that they have the competencies and skills needed to do that specific occupation. And finally, business involvement. Again, we can't stress enough, the business involvement is key. If we don't have businesses, we don't have an apprenticeship. And that's where they learn on the job. Next slide, please. So apprenticeship isn't always as rigid as some people may think. It is, the programs can be adaptable and flexible. So there's a lot going on in this slide. It just shows you different ways that an apprenticeship could be set up. So you've got the traditional way where you have that related training instruction going on through the entire 4 years or 2 years or 3 years, however long the program is set up for. It shows that they're getting the related training and instruction as well as they're working on the job and getting paid. Another way is front-loading training. Sometimes apprentices need to have some specific knowledge or skills before they actually can be on the job doing some things. And so you front-load that training at first, and then they go on the job and start learning through work-based learning. Or it could be segmented, you know, you go to school, then you work for a long time, then you go back and get more training. They can be competency-based, time-based, or a hybrid. So apprenticeships, how they're designed is definitely, is the program length and design, it varies and it's driven by the industry needs. Next slide, please. So just to let you know, apprenticeships are not a charity. If it didn't work for businesses, then they wouldn't work at all. So it benefits both businesses and individuals. For businesses, like Patrick said, it's a talent pipeline management strategy, how they get their workforce, how to grow their workforce, and get the skills that they need in their employees. For individuals, it is work-based learning that leads to that career. So apprenticeship is one of those strategies. If it didn't meet the business needs, it wouldn't be worth it to the employer. So next slide, please. So with that in mind, we've come up with this framework for the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board's Apprenticeship Committee is a strong voice in the state's workforce development system. And I'm that lead for DCO, for the Apprenticeship Committee. And over the past couple of years, the Systems and Supports Work Group for this committee has researched and met to create this vision for expanding apprenticeship across the state. And they've concluded that, because we talked about how important it is to have employer engagement, they concluded a couple of ways to reach this goal is through having regional apprenticeship navigators and also apprenticeship intermediaries. Because we need that employer engagement and buy-in, and it's so critical, you know, the Apprenticeship Committee put these specific roles for recruiting businesses and educating on the value of apprenticeship and navigating the system. So that's where the navigating comes from, the apprenticeship navigator. And because it's a lot of work for just a single business to decide all of a sudden they want an apprenticeship program, to put all of that together, to make it easier for businesses, we have the intermediaries, and they're the major partner that's coordinating, designing, and managing this apprenticeship program. So again, this benefits both the businesses and the potential apprentices, the individuals, and there are a plethora of stakeholders involved. These could be school districts, community-based organizations, community colleges, other training providers, unions, chambers of commerce, local workforce areas. So apprenticeship doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's definitely made up of partnerships. Next slide, please.
Okay. So the program purpose, ultimately, we receive these funds, and our primary deliverable is to enroll at least 800 new registered apprentices by June of 2022. So, the governor and the department recognize that apprenticeships are a promising work-based learning strategy connecting individuals to a career pathway, as well as being a solution for business to find and tap into undiscovered talent. The department and the Illinois Workforce Board Apprenticeship Committee have determined support for apprenticeship intermediaries and regional navigators are the best investment to build the foundation for apprenticeship expansion in Illinois. Regional apprenticeship navigators and apprenticeship intermediaries represent two important sides of a statewide apprenticeship system. Navigators represent the demand side, so that would be businesses who want to host apprenticeships, and intermediaries represent the supply side, the institutions and or partnerships that coordinate and or implement apprenticeship programs, including recruiting potential apprentices and preparing them to enter apprenticeships. The state received its third apprenticeship expansion grant from the United States Department of Labor this June. Again, it's worth repeating multiple times throughout this presentation. It's the express purpose of this grant to increase the number of registered apprentices by 800 before June 2022. We will continue to repeat this as it is the basis for us receiving the Department of Labor funding and is the primary deliverable under this grant. Other goals include increasing number of apprentices from historically underrepresented populations and growing apprenticeships as a career pathway strategy in more places in Illinois. This also includes the types of apprenticeships that will be grown across Illinois. We tend to only relate apprenticeships many times to the more traditional types of apprenticeships in construction, etc. We're very much working and have achieved many new types of apprenticeships across Illinois. Next slide, please. So this grant framework was developed based on feedback from the Apprenticeship Committee and last year's apprenticeship expansion grantees. The original Notice of Funding opportunity has now been refined and polished for additional clarity. And that breaks down into the state has 3 grant approaches, which are above, which are in the slide. The first one is funding regional apprenticeship navigators. The navigators are unique in that we are very much interested in coverage across the state of Illinois' geographic area, and they are a one-stop kind of resource for all things apprenticeships, and will leverage partnerships and coordinate with entities within their assigned regions to facilitate the expansion and connection with intermediaries. So we want to emphasize that although we have currently navigators and intermediaries, we want to emphasize that this is a clean slate for this particular new grant, this Notice of Funding opportunity. So just because you are a grantee does not guarantee that you will be one in this next Notice of Funding opportunity. In an effort to meet our deliverables of the 800 new apprentices and partner/capitalize on what already exists, approach number 2 has been added and is an opportunity to maximize what is already out there / already exists. And then approach number 3 is back to somewhat of the traditional intermediary that we had in our original, in last year's Notice of Funding opportunity.
Next slide, please. So what you see here is we're talking about program approach number 1. So we're funding, like Patrick said, we're funding navigators and we're funding intermediaries. So here's what we want from the navigators. We want a navigator in all 10 economic development regions within the state. So the map you see happens to show all 10 regions. It's a little hard to see, but they're outlined in red. It also shows the local workforce areas, and it's also overlaid with the counties. So you can find your county, find then what local workforce area you're in, and also what economic development region you're in. So we ideally want to fund a navigator in every single region. Ideally, we'd like to fund 10. Consideration would be given to having more than one navigator in the Northeast region, in the greater Chicago metropolitan area, actually, because of the density there. The navigators our funded range is $100,000 to $150,000, and we're funding up to $1.5 million for navigators total. And again, the navigators, they're going to cultivate the apprenticeship development in their region, and we want them all across the state. So next slide, please.
I just want to add in as a point on this. the previous slide, the importance of getting the full state coverage. That's a primary interest to us in that we want to make sure that there is a resource for all regions and not just a few of them. Next slide.
All right. What does a navigator do? Well, they are the key point of contact and support for any business or intermediary in their region, despite the industry. So they understand both business development and workforce development, so they can help businesses navigate that system.
So, applicants need to understand that they must articulate and marry the state's overarching workforce strategies with apprenticeship strategies. That is critical for this navigator. Next slide, please.
So the Systems and Support Work Group from the Apprenticeship Committee has refined these roles of both navigator and intermediary, and they have found what the elements of a successful navigator is. And so right here, while you're writing your proposal, we want to know that you understand what makes a successful apprenticeship navigator. So they market and promote apprenticeships in their region. They're the liaison with all of the intermediaries. They know their region and they cultivate the relationships with all the different stakeholders. Remember all those stakeholders I named before. They're going to know who's in their region. They're going to develop partnerships. They need to communicate the value of gender and racial diversity to employers, so they not only need to understand it themselves, they need to know how to communicate it to employers. Next slide, please. So the outcomes for the regional apprenticeship navigators and deliverables, we're going to ask you to fill out attachment 2 in the NOFO, but we're going to want to know how many new businesses are engaged, how many new or expanded registered apprenticeship programs have you as a navigator been able to start or expand? How many new sponsors have received support from you? Are there partnerships in areas that need to be created, and did you create them and have events and support your industry partnerships? And I mean, I can't stress enough about the partnerships. And then also matching and leverage funds. Patrick, you have a good thing that you say about that so many people.
They just miss so many opportunities, either because they assume we know that you're leveraging funds or utilizing other funding resources or utilizing employer funding at some level. But any opportunity that you can show that you're matching or leveraging these funds, we realize that these funds are somewhat limited. We wish we had more to expand this, but we are really looking for this information because we can't know that unless you're sharing that with us, or certainly our evaluators will not know that. One thing I want to say about this particular slide too is these are deliverables and outcomes. But overall, in the previous notice of funding opportunity, we did offer an option of a hybrid. We are not offering that option this time. So we want to be really clear. We said it in a few slides ago that it is kind of a clean slate. We are not offering that option of a hybrid to intermediary / navigator. We want a clear distinction between the navigators and the two types of intermediaries.
And one organization can apply for both.
Yeah.
They need to be separate proposals.
Yes, they just need to be separate proposals.
And separate staff.
Because, and the reasoning for that is when the evaluators are reading that, it's hard for them to tease it apart or to separate when you're talking about this. So we want it to be very clear, and we want you to have that opportunity to articulate very clearly how you will act as a navigator, and very clearly how you will act in what capacity and which one, approach 2 or 3, as an intermediary.
Next slide, please.
Okay, so this grant round seeks to supplement apprenticeship programs that have existing apprenticeship programs in place or can quickly operationalize emerging apprenticeship programs with a focus on the ability to immediately recruit and register apprentices. Equity, this grant round seeks to support projects that proactively create recruiting outreach and support strategies that result in an increase of the number of diverse populations enrolling in and successfully completing apprenticeship. These grants will leverage the activity of established intermediaries that supplement both existing and emerging programs, including women, minorities, and underserved populations in Illinois. I'm going to specifically go back to this one. We're calling this a light touch, but I'm going back to this one because this one was put into this notice of funding opportunity because there are a lot of great programs out there, and we were not capitalizing or maximizing our opportunity for this light touch to incorporate and pull them into the overall state system and take that opportunity to really truly reach that goal of the 800 number. We need everyone in this. So that's why we put that in there. We're calling this the light touch, as I said. We want to expand existing intermediaries, and part of that is to expand underrepresented populations. If you receive money for program development, we want to count all of your new apprentices, whether they are WIOA eligible or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act eligible or not. However, you will still need to complete attachment 2 and let us know your projected numbers. Next slide, please. So, equity, another goal is to increase the number of individuals that are historically underrepresented in existing apprenticeship programs, which I previously mentioned, including women, minorities, and underserved populations in Illinois. We understand it takes time and resources to design, develop, and implement new programs, and the state is willing to invest in that. A major goal of new development grants will be to cultivate apprenticeship development and registered apprentice enrollment in areas of the state where apprenticeship programs do not exist or are underdeveloped despite employer interest. We call this approach the heavy touch. These are primarily going to be new intermediaries. We understand it takes time to design, develop, and implement programs that aggregate the needs of business, and we are willing to invest in that through this approach.
Next slide.
Please note that due to limited funds, the number of intermediaries we can fund is also limited, but leveraged funds and other sources to expand the number of intermediaries is encouraged. The state goal for the future is an unlimited number of intermediaries around the state. You will note that this is why we have dedicated more funding to intermediaries than navigators. So, you know, in the previous slides, we have clearly spelled out what funding will be available, and as you can see, there are more funds available for the intermediaries than for the navigators. But again, we're looking for a geographic spreading of the navigators to ensure full coverage throughout the state of Illinois on the navigator end of this.
And so what do intermediaries do? They are the major coordinating partner, and usually are the major one that manages the apprenticeship program. So the next slide, please. So just like the Systems and Support Work Group had found elements of successful navigators, these are the elements of successful intermediaries, where they develop, design, and implement the registered apprenticeship programs. They have clear roles, so these apprenticeships just don't happen in a vacuum. There's always partnerships, and so all the partners have clear roles. They act as the coordinator, as I said. They manage the programs. They can be multi-sector, or they can be sector-specific. So there are some intermediaries that are definitely sector-specific, maybe it's an industry association or a union or something like that. But then there are, like Harper College, who's an intermediary, has retail and finance and all kinds, manufacturing. They have all kinds of different sectors programs that they're an intermediary for. So as long as it's aligned with whatever the demand is in the region, that is very important. They perform the program management responsibilities and they address equity. They're not limited to a certain kind of entity, so they could include, intermediaries can be, you know, unions, industry associations, chambers of commerce, community-based organizations, local workforce areas, technical schools, school districts. It just depends on who is going to be that major partner in program design and development and implementation.
And they're kind of the foundation that create assistance and resources to both the participant and the business. They bring it together for the supply and the demand.
Yeah, next slide, please.
So again, we're back to the deliverables. I don't need to read the slide to you. You can see clearly what those deliverables are for the intermediaries. They relate back to everything that we've mentioned up to now. This is a key component, and we point these out because these will be specifically tracked through a system that will be created, and we're hoping to get implemented sometime in February or March.
Correct. So next slide, please. You know, just so that to try to clarify for you guys, because we have two approaches for intermediaries, this is showing you what the difference is between new and existing. So the new one, a new intermediary, it could be let's say it could be a school district that's trying to start registered high school apprenticeships and they've never had them before. It could be an industry association that's never been in the business of managing these apprenticeship programs before. Existing are ones that are already in place and established. So they have some going on. Maybe they want to expand existing ones, or because they do have that capacity and the knowledge under the belt with managing and running apprenticeship programs, that they could easily start a new one and get it on the ground running, immediately. Next slide, please. So just to let you know, the next few slides are going to be on the grantee requirements, so we're just going to highlight some of those. So next slide, please. Okay, these are just a few requirement highlights. It's not the full list, so please refer to the NOFO. One thing is that we're going to have navigators participate in the Talent Pipeline Management Academy that Patrick had talked about. We do want to broaden it to intermediaries, and we may do that, but right now we know that for sure we're going to get the navigators to do that. We want, so through the Apprenticeship Committee and the work groups in the Apprenticeship Committee, we've been trying to build an apprenticeship ecosystem. And as I stated that the navigators and intermediaries were, these roles were defined and created by the Apprenticeship Committee, well, they are an important piece to this ecosystem. So we want them to be engaged with the Apprenticeship Committee, with various networks, attend trainings. We want them to be a part of the apprenticeship system building. So we also, the navigators and intermediaries must encourage apprenticeship expansion in emerging industries and in regional and local areas. They must use the state, like Patrick says, you're going to have to use the state performance management system that's being developed right now with the user-friendly in mind. And we've got to count all our 800 participants. So if you get any kind of money from this grant, we want to count any new apprentice, registered apprentice in it. Next slide, please. One other point I want to make is that this is a determination made by DCO. We received the funding, DCO and the Illinois Workforce Board and the Apprenticeship Committee
have all taken a look at the best strategies and the best way to approach this as a kind of a team effort. And I think it's important that there will be an expectation that, you know, the grantees, you know, it's not something nice if you can make it. We want those grantees to be a part of the apprenticeship committee. You're expanding apprenticeship, you know, across Illinois with the guidance of the apprenticeship committee. And so it is really important that there is involvement at that end. It is not something that is optional, and nor is the training, nor is the system. So those are all things that will be in the contract should you receive a grant, and the expectation will be there that there will be participation.
Yes, thank you. For this slide, we know that gender and racial diversity is lacking in many apprenticeship programs. So addressing these equity issues is a priority for the state. So the state is committed, the IWEB Apprenticeship Committee is committed, the governor is committed to racial and gender equity in apprenticeship programs. So addressing this in your proposal is vitally important. We want you to tell us your strategy for how you're going to address this. And a strategy is more than just saying you're going to recruit women and people of color. This is, you know, definitely a priority, but again, I want to say that no matter what the registered apprentice is in gender or racial ethnicity, that we still want to count all 800.
Yeah, I mean,
how did I say that?
I think it's really, really important that, you know, this is our goal moving forward. This is a priority for us. But again, I'm going to bring it back to our deliverables for this is 800 apprentice registered, and that is our primary deliverable, and we've got to get to that number. So, you know, if, you know, we want to include all registered apprenticeships in Illinois.
Yes, and then just to let you know that if you need more guidance on how to address, you know, the equity issues, there are a lot of resources in the NOFO itself, and then also on the landing page. So we've provided some, and we're actually going to add to it as we find them for you. So please refer to those as you're putting your proposal together. Next slide, please. So the next slide has to do, so we talked about targeted populations, but now targeted industries, occupations, and growth sectors. This comes out of the WIOA state plan, Illinois state plan. It's a draft at the moment, but we do have a link to it for you guys. These are the leading sectors and the medium growth sectors. Now, we want you to show the demand that's in your region. So if you have a demand that doesn't necessarily fit into these sectors, that's okay, but you've got to prove what that demand is. And show us what the data says. Next slide, please.
Can I just say about this slide that I think it points out the necessity to be extraordinarily familiar, regardless of which approach you're applying for. You should be familiar with the the state unified plan. Mm-hmm. You should be familiar with your regional plan. You should be familiar with your local plan as well. Having these foundational kind of guidelines is really going to help you as an applicant address and achieve your goals.
Yes. Next slide, please. So usually when we think of apprentices or apprenticeships, we think that it's made for brand new hires and for young people. That's not necessarily so. So can these grants support incumbent workers? Absolutely, yes. Apprenticeship can definitely be used as a strategy to upskill current employees. And with this grant, which is a little bit different, I think, from previous ones, is that you can actually use funding for to support the work-based training aspect of it. Companies are typically, though, required to pay at least 50% of the incumbent worker training costs. This is really, really important because when we're taking a look at
the need to expand and develop a talent pipeline, it is important to remember that there are more people leaving our talent pipeline than there are entering it. So we have to look for opportunities, ways to best achieve retention of these folks, transition of these folks, and in addition to that, you know, it's a great way to retain folks as mentors. We know they stay with companies longer as mentors. So these are all things that can help move us to that next level with work-based learning and apprenticeship expansion, especially on this mentor end. Just food for thought.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Can these grants support new employees? Well, absolutely. One thing, though, if they do support new employees and provide them with direct services, the individuals must meet the eligibility requirements for WIOA regulations. And so, therefore, you're going to need to have a partnership or memorandum of understanding with either your local workforce area or a service provider that can actually certify the eligibility of the apprentices. And of course, you're going to have to use the Illinois workNet for all apprentices as well. But, you know, direct services can include the related technical instruction, the on-the-job learning portion, work-based learning portion, supportive services, case management, things of that nature. And ultimately, you know, although intermediaries help recruit apprentices, it's ultimately the employer's decision on who they hire. But that is something that the intermediary should help the employer with. Next slide, please. Can these grants support pre-apprenticeship programs? Okay, so we know, well, first we know we have to have 800 new registered apprentices. There may be some attrition, so definitely we may want to overshoot our 800 because sometimes people don't stay in the system because life happens. But we know that some people need extra supports or more skills or knowledge before they can even be eligible to enter a registered apprenticeship program. So therefore, pre-apprenticeships are necessary. So the long answer is to say, yes, we can support pre-apprenticeship programs with the dollars from this grant. However, there is a caveat that those pre-apprentices, since we can't count them, must be in a registered apprenticeship program before the end of the grant period.
So in that same vein, let me ask you a question. I mean, I know the answer, but
okay.
I want to ask this in the way it's been asked to us.
Okay.
If a program isn't a registered apprenticeship, could the grant be used to assist in becoming a registered apprenticeship program? That is great.
Okay.
That's a little bit of a two-part because it falls into what you just said. Keeping in mind, so the answer is yes, but they would have to be registered
by the time the end of the grant.
So
yes.
That's the key.
But that is a perfect way to get a program that's already running and functioning to bring it up to the level of registered apprenticeship. It would be a great use of this money.
And that's kind of all the things we've been talking about up to now.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm going to take you back to that 800 number.
Yeah.
You got to get to that goal. We got to get to that goal. And so the key there is getting it to a registered apprenticeship before the end, getting those participants enrolled in a registered apprenticeship before the end.
Okay, next slide, please. The next few slides, we're going to talk about just elements for a competitive proposal. So next slide, please. So all of your proposals, all the applications must have a signed application. This is pretty much the cover sheet. An executive summary, so that we can kind of know what we're going to be reading before the reviewers can know what is going to happen before they ever look at the entire proposal. The technical proposal, this is the meat of it, and there's a separate one that's required for navigators and intermediaries. So if your organization is applying for both, they have to be separate proposals. Project implementation plan, this really helps the reviewers understand how your project is going to get going and continue. Resumes of program staff, any MOUs or partnership agreements need to be in your application. and also you must submit a budget proposal. So next slide, please. So this, I think Patrick already talked about, that you need to understand the state unified plan, your regional plans, and your local WIOA partner plans, the local workforce area plans. They really will give you guidance. They've done a lot of research already on what emerging sectors or occupations are in the area, and where you can fill the gaps. So,
right, and we want to expand this across the state. In every region, we want intermediaries. In every region, we want a navigator, so that we have coverage in every local workforce area, and we don't have any blank areas or areas that are deficient in providing assistance, resources, and information to businesses and participants seeking out apprentice programs.
Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't see it was on there.
No,
okay.
I want to say that listen, please, very closely to Jennifer on this slide, because partnerships are a critical component.
Yeah, apprenticeships don't happen in a vacuum.
Right, that's exactly right. And I just want to tell you, the evaluators will be looking for these partnerships and how they have clearly been articulated, because we noticed in some of the previous rounds that people assume we know about partnerships. So, but
the reviewers will not know, and so you need to tell us. And it really takes a village. If you submit a proposal and you don't mention any other partners in there, then it's not strong at all. It won't even be considered. So there's so many different types of partnerships can happen. There's a lot going on in this slide, but we want you to spell out in your proposal how you all are working together to make this happen, whether you're a navigator or you're an intermediary.
And I would go one step beyond this also, because I think there is opportunity for partnerships even between navigators, between regions. If you know some partners that cross over regions, or you have multiple regions you're interested in, I think that is every bit as critical. I hope we have not isolated it to a single region. We never have said that a navigator can only be for one region.
Right. And I just lost the PowerPoint.
It's reconnected.
We had a small problem.
So I think we've kind of beat the importance of a partnership in. The next slide is MOUs. MOUs are a must, and I think what is valuable to you folks that may be applying for a grant, and what is important that is looked at in an MOU is clarity in those MOUs, specification in the MOUs. We appreciate that MOUs can be somewhat challenging, but the challenge is a value added, because in previous grants and other grants that we've had, where there lacks clarity and specificity, we find that the grants lack some structure, and the subcontractors, et cetera, do not have a clear understanding of the expectations, and so there have been issues with that. Another point on the MOU issue is, we're not looking for you to provide us an MOU that already exists out there, such as an MOU between a provider and a local workforce area. We are looking for you to, provide something that is clear, specific, and unique to this grant, and addresses the coordination and cooperation between the participants and the partnerships that exist under this grant.
Yeah, and I just want to say sometimes it takes longer than you think it should to get an MOU in place, so start now with your partners. So next slide, please. We don't have the slides up at the moment because we've lost connection, but we have them in front of us, so we'll continue. Again, we just wanted to show you the landing page for this NOFO. It's very important for all of the resources and the NOFO itself, so we wanted to bring that to your attention again. Next page, next slide, please. Navigator proposals must have. So when you're putting this together, what we're looking for is the region and the needs and opportunities within there, how you are going to serve as that key point of contact, you know, your business outreach and development plan or strategy, any evidence that of your existing capacity and past experience to perform this, let us know. And also, of course, evidence that you're going to be able to help increase the number of apprentices in your area by getting apprenticeship programs established. So the next slide, I'm assuming it's up.
Hey, why don't we hang on for a second? David Garvey, are the slides still running through?
Yes, yes, they are.
Okay, great. We'll continue on.
Yeah. So intermediary proposal must have a solid program designs and implementation plan. For the new ones, how will you develop the programs where they don't exist? If you're a brand new intermediary, tell us what your plan is to get it going. For the existing intermediaries, how are you leveraging what you already have to build and expand on what you've already got going, or how you can get a new one going quickly? And then just a solid outreach plan for apprentices, for potential apprentices. Of course, again, the employer hires them. They're the ultimate decision makers on who they hire, but you help with finding those apprentices. And of course, evidence that you're going to increase the number of apprentices. So next slide. Lucky you guys, the Patrick and Jen Roadshow is happening again. So we're doing bidders conferences all over the state. We encourage you to come to those because you can ask open questions. We cannot speak to you individually about this NOFO at all.
That's a really good point. I know that our names and our email addresses are listed on the in multiple places. But what's really important is we can answer a question in a bidders conference. We will try to answer a couple of questions in this at the end of each half of this.
And via email at that apprenticeship, that we're going to give you that email address.
We'll have an FAQ
yes, exactly.
Available, and so all questions must go through the FAQ. Neither one of us can, no one should be answering questions directly to someone individually.
Next slide, please.
Did you want to go through where these are at? I think we have a couple minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So the first bidders conference is tomorrow, and it starts at 9 a.m. And then we have Naperville, Rockford, Peoria, Champaign, Marion, Collinsville, and Springfield.
You can go to that NOFO landing page, and those links will work for you to register for these. So it's important that you register.
And we will post it on the NOFO. We did have a couple that didn't have anybody registered yet, but it's relatively new. So we'll make sure that we let you know when they're filled up.
All right, application review information. Jen Phillips, would you like to cover this slide?
Hi, I just had to unmute my audio. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes,
we can hear you.
All right. So the review criteria when your proposals are being evaluated by a team of external reviewers will follow the following criteria. So there'll be the applicant capacity, portion of the proposal will count for about 20%. How well you document the need and the opportunity, including the geographic considerations. That means how you're using the local labor market information, your information from your local workforce areas, and your information about employer demand and also participant demand will factor into that 25% of documentation of need and opportunity. The quality of the project plan is the biggest percentage in the review process. It's 35%. Please note that within the proposal outlines for both navigators and apprentices, there are specific questions and requirements related to articulating your strategies for addressing equity in apprenticeships that will be expected for competitive proposals. And finally, how you address your budget narrative, how cost effective you think your proposal will be, and what kind of return on investment and long-term sustainability will all be things that the reviewers will be looking for, and that will be 20% of the review process. Next slide.
Yeah. Application timeline.
Okay, so I just want to, I don't have to read you this information on here. The applications are due, no exceptions, by 5 p.m. Central Time, December 2nd, 2019. So please, I just want to tell you, don't call our director, don't, just make sure that your application is submitted by 5 p.m. Central Time, December 2nd. No exceptions. I think everything else stands for itself.
Yeah.
Next slide. So the applications must be received by 5 p.m. December 2nd. We've got that on there. Uniform application form, executive summary, technical proposal, resumes of program staff, partnership agreement and MOUs, budget proposal. We've got the standards on the formatting and the paper size, the limits on the number of pages. Important. I'm going to kind of breeze. Next slide, please. Applications are subject to disclosure in response to requests received under provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. Questions regarding, we just talked about this, need to go into the FAQ. We cannot answer any questions directly for anyone. The web page is listed here. Next slide, please. The FAQ is listed here. Gives you direction on that. Next slide, please. This is again the FAQ.
Yeah. So submit all questions to that. And then there was a question of what is the grant period?
So one thing I wanted to ask Jennifer Phillips, are you still on?
Unmute, Jen. Okay, maybe go forward.
So we have the apprenticeship tools and resources.
Sorry, guys. Dave had to unmute me. So
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Just take a minute.
So there was a number of questions. I'm sorry, Jennifer Phillips.
Yes,
We were going through the presentation, and I couldn't read those questions.
Let me read those to you guys, and then you can answer them.
That's great.
Okay. So some of them we've been answering on a rolling basis, but I saved a couple to be able to answer now before John Barr comes on. So
John's in here, by the way.
Okay. Well, let me know how many we have time for. So one question is, can the IWT employer match be used as leverage funds? I think that's probably a quick answer.
They're thinking.
It has, yeah, that'll be, we'll put a response on the FAQ, but the short answer is that you will have to document, so if you're going to do an incumbent worker project, there is a minimum of a 50% match by the company. And there's some intricacies around how you report that, and we will post that on the FAQ.
All right, thanks, John. It's kind of a follow-up question. So will employers, could employers who could receive, they could receive grant incentives along with the $3,500 tax credit?
So so again, we'll probably post a response on the FAQ. This NOFO is we are looking to coordinate activities across agencies, across programs. There is no prohibition for a company or a project taking advantage of both opportunities. However, we will be looking at, certainly, any double dipping considerations. Yes, again, for a full answer, look at the FAQ on that one.
Perfect. Here are two that are sort of related. I'm going to ask them one at a time. Is there a grant period specified?
There is not. Generally speaking, would anticipate 12 to 18 month projects. Realistically, grants will be awarded in the spring. So what does that mean as far as the time? Generally speaking, you're looking at March or between March and June as an official start date. That's what we know right now based on the review schedule.
Okay, and here's a slight variant on that, and it is, are the decisions rolling at all? The language on the due date is the cutoff date to ensure the proposals will be considered, as quoted. It seems to suggest that decisions might be made on a rolling basis. Please clarify. Yeah,
for this current year, this is, it is a, decisions in this current fiscal year, that's the due date. So we can clarify that also in the FAQ that, under this NOFO, applications that are received by the due date will be reviewed. If there are subsequent proposals that are reviewed, it will most likely be under a separate NOFO. We can clarify that on the FAQ.
Okay. Here's another question. I understand the 800 number, but does that mean that all the applicants must be WIOA eligible?
No.
Yeah. Patrick, can you go a little further?
Yeah. So we can count folks that are not WIOA eligible within this 800 number. This is all 800 just need to be registered apprentices.
So if you receive money for this grant and you do serve some WIOA participants directly with it, but you have other non-WIOA participants, we still want to count those because we've received money for the grant. You've received money. And
this kind of leads into that light touch, the new approach that we put on there, where we want to maximize our opportunity for folks that already have an apprenticeship program out there as a natural intermediary that they may be facilitating. This is a great opportunity for them.
Right, and this is where Jen Foyle commented the fact that there's funding coming from the United States Department of Labor blended with state of Illinois resources to increase the flexibility for this apprenticeship expansion.
Correct.
Here is another question. Is this grant set up where the grantee works directly with the state?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry?
I think we need to start John's presentation because he has a hard stop.
Very good. Just to let everybody on the webinar know, it looks like there are probably 4 or 5 more questions we didn't get to. These are all being logged and will show up in the FAQ in written form later.
Right, we'll get to those, and then we'll try to, you know, if somebody has a question about the landing pages or the resources, we thought we would have enough time for that. You know, we can certainly facilitate that. Send us an FAQ if you're having some difficulty with the landing page, and then in the bidders conferences also we'll try to touch on that a little bit if we have some opportunity. But with that, I'd like to introduce John Barr, and he is from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity as well. And he's going to talk to you about everything Grant 101 to GATA.
Great. Thanks, Patrick and team. So for many of you who have participated in grant information sessions, this next part of the presentation is going to be very familiar for you. In fact, it's essentially the same information that has been provided in last year and has been updated with some new information. The intent here is to provide a level playing field for all potential applicants who you know, are interested in coming in for funding. And so what I'm going to talk about today is just some very high-level considerations for applying for a grant. And as Patrick and team have probably already given you the disclaimer, the information that we provided or we will provide in the presentation is for your information only, and you know, for official the official regulations around the grant opportunity and the GATA, as we'll come to speak of, is located in the websites and in the regulations. So I don't want anything that I say doesn't, you know, supersede the information that is written in the law or in the regulations. So today I'm going to talk about the grant life cycle and really focus around the pre-award phase, right? So putting together your application for funding. You know, if you are awarded funding, we'll go through a whole other set of training activities that will follow kind of a similar format, and the goal here is to make you have a successful project. One of our goals out of this information session, this webinar, as well as the in-person sessions, is to make you successful as applicants, because we want to broaden our pool across the board for good apprenticeship projects. So again, we're focusing today on the pre-award phase. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to be talking about the Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. It was a law that was established a couple of years ago to increase the transparency and effectiveness of grants throughout state agencies. In a nutshell, it is providing rules and templates and procedures that are standardized across the agencies. So it, in theory, will help you as a grantee, so you would know what to expect from agencies as you apply for funds, and it also helps state agencies and the leadership as they look at standardizing information that's requested and also being accountable for taxpayer dollars. Next slide, please. So the pre-award requirements are outlined within the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and you'll note that Notice of Funding Opportunity, it's a pretty healthy sized document, and one of the reasons that it's so large is because, again, it's standardized and it has a lot of the background information about some of these requirements, and the information is intended to level the playing field across all applicants. So you'll see in the Notice of Funding Opportunity that it outlines the grant registration, the pre-qualification, the risk assessment, and the disclosures and conflict of interest documents. Next slide. And so also we're going to talk about the indirect cost rate is something around the budgeting for the grant opportunity. We're not going to go into a ton of detail, but there are a number of resources that are listed here. Next slide, please. So for grant registrations, all new grantees, right? So if you've never received a grant or haven't applied for a grant in the last 2 or 3 years, you will be required to register with the state of Illinois at the illinois.gov authentication portal. So the person that goes through this process should really be your chief financial officer or another manager within your organization who is like the official agency contact. They should make sure that they keep the information around the grantee registration because that email address that you register for will be the source of a number of important automated messages from the grant registration system. All of this is coordinated by the state's Office of Management and Budget. And to start the process, you go to the website that is listed here, grants.illinois.gov/portal. When you complete the registration, it will trigger a pre-qualification check. These are internal checks. And in the next slide, it goes through and checks a number of different systems within the government, both the federal and the state government, to verify that you have the information in place, that you have a DUNS number, that you're currently have a SAMS.gov account, that you're in good standing with the Secretary of State, that you're not on the federal excluded parties list, you're not on the Illinois Stop Payment list, and you're not on a DHFS sanction list. If you are, if one of these items are an issue, you'll be notified via email of the issue, and we'll need to address that. Next slide, please. So if there are no issues, you'll be, GATA portal will send you that qualified status. And again, if there are issues, it will send you, some links to information where you can go and correct the problem. If you're on the federal excluded parties list, you're excluded from the grant opportunity, and I'm sorry, this opportunity won't work for you. These are federal dollars, and all of those federal requirements pass through to you, even though the organization that will issue the grant is the State of Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to talk about risk assessment. There's a couple of different activities that occur here. First is the fiscal and administrative risk, okay? As part of your registration, organizations, grantees, are required to complete what's called this internal control questionnaire. So it's a survey that asks you about how you operate from a fiscal and administrative standpoint. This survey should be completed, and it's web-based. Web-based survey should be completed again by someone who's in your fiscal office, your chief financial person, or your chief budget person, or your executive director, who knows how things are handled administratively within your organization. Okay, this questionnaire, internal control questionnaire, is mandated by every grantee. You have to do it on an annual basis, and the intent is essentially to see do you have the back end fiscal and administrative procedures and capacity in place to administer a grant? Based on your responses, it will identify potential areas of concern or weakness where, you know, in some cases will result in some additional follow-up or, in many cases, additional conditions within the grants. But just because you come back with conditions on your internal control questionnaire doesn't mean that you're necessarily knocked out of the box for receiving a grant. So the internal control questionnaire should be completed prior to applying for a grant, okay? So that's really important. Make sure that you are registered and that you complete your internal control questionnaire prior to applying for the grant. So if you are thinking of applying for this opportunity, I would get with your fiscal folks ASAP and make sure that you are you got on the calendar to get this process rolling. The next risk assessment piece is the program risk assessment. Now this piece is conducted after you submit your application if you are selected as a finalist, okay? So if you are selected for a finalist based on the merit review of your proposal, we will send you a link that will go into some additional details about your programmatic staff. So your executive director and your other kind of program leads would be the correct individuals to complete this part of the risk assessment. It's completely separate and it is also web-based, and we will send you a link with additional instructions. As the slide says, the risk profile is determined, or a risk profile is developed based on the information that we gather from if you have prior history with us, and also from these two risk assessments. Next slide, please. Indirect cost rate. So one of the items that you will have to address as you look at your proposal submission is the indirect cost rate. So within the budget, and we'll look at the budget in a minute, but part of the budget is to identify any indirect cost, and you have a number of different options. But essentially, an indirect cost, it's a way to determine the appropriate amount of overhead that should be charged to the grant. Indirect cost rate is the ratio between the total indirect expenses and a direct cost base. Okay, so this is a presentation about indirect. We actually do have some webinars that are solely focused on indirect, and if you are new to this, I would highly recommend that you listen to those webinars, and the web address will be listed at the end of this show. But for your options for the grant, you can use your current federal rate if you have a federal rate. You can negotiate a rate with the state of Illinois. You can elect to use the 10% de minimis rate, or you can elect to decline the indirect cost rate. Again, all this is pretty technical in nature, but we're happy to help with some resources to point you to, and if you're really having trouble, additional technical assistance is available. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. I think we want to just keep moving there. So this is the indirect costs. So if you are a new grantee, you will have to identify your selection of indirect costs, and you have to be consistent across all of your grantees or all of your grants with the state of Illinois. Even if you're going to use the 10% de minimis rate, you still have to make this selection in the centralized indirect cost rate system. Again, this is on that OMB grant portal where you will maintain your information for your organization. So again, make sure that the person who registers you is the right individual to receive important information about your grant, as well as information about the indirect cost rate. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next part of this is to focus around the standard application grant award documents. The first, Patrick and the team talked in detail about the notice of funding award. One of the key advantages of GATA, Grant Accountability Transparency Act, is that it standardized these grant opportunities, and there's also a new website where all of the open grants throughout all of the state agencies are posted. So at this web link, this catalog of state financial assistance, that is where information about not only this apprenticeship NOFO, but other grant opportunities is posted. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to go to that link. Other documents that are required is the uniform application, which is basically, it is a cover page for your overall proposal, the uniform budget template, and finally the notice of state award. Next slide, please. All right, so these are typical application requirements, and these are also included in the apprenticeship notice of funding opportunity. And those are all summarized within the application. Looking for the specific page, it's actually toward the end of the application. The technical proposal, looking at the capacity, documentation of need, your technical plan, and your proposed outcomes, return on investment. We ask for an implementation plan and schedule. We ask for any of the required forms and exhibits, including the attachment 2, which is that high-level overview of your project, which Patrick went into depth about that. Resumes of program staff, any agreements or memorandum of understanding that Patrick talked about, and then finally the uniform budget proposal. Next slide, please. All right, so these next couple slides are just kind of general, just very high level, general thoughts as you put together your applications. Okay, so we're going to go through each part of the proposal, each of the 4 sections, and just remember, the individuals who are reviewing your projects, they could know nothing about you and your organization and your project. So you really have to lay the groundwork and, paint the picture in the most efficient way that you can, and make it as crystal clear about who you are and your capacity, and looking at the questions that are listed here. I'm not going to belabor those, but again, as you sit down, if I'm in your shoes and thinking about writing this application, these are some of the key questions that I'm going to read over before I dig into the responses, my written responses. Next slide, please. Same thing as far as documentation of need. What is that targeted population? Can you provide statistics to prove it, right? So it's one thing to provide generalizations, but can you provide statistical evidence and and can you refer to other plans that are related, and can you illustrate how how you are identifying a specific need in your region? Next slide, please. Your operational plan, talking about, what is the solution to the problem that you identified in the need, right? What are the steps that you're going to take? It's the who, what, when, why, and hows, right? So it's all the laying out, what is your approach, and how are you going to be successful in moving the number of registered apprentices. Always tie your objectives back to the identified need and problem. Next slide, please. Last is the return on investment in the budget. And new this year is an item you know or should note on the criteria, is that we want you to provide a budget narrative, and a budget overview / narrative that is really an analysis of the return on investment. In years past, we have found that this is an area that is particularly lacking in proposals. You'll note that it's a significant number of points in the overall review, and although there is a technical space within the budget template for you to describe what the costs are, many proposals fall short on providing that justification and that that qualitative analysis of why the costs are needed overall, and what's the bottom line return on investment. Also around the sustainability, that's also a key point that I think is also noteworthy within the NOFO that is in front of you today. Next slide, please. So the uniform application for state grant assistance. David, I don't know if you're able to get to the, if you can flip to the website and pull up that actual document right now. If you're able to do that quickly, we can just just show what that looks like. So here again is the website, and he's quickly clicking on the standard application, and there it is. So this is the uniform application for state grant assistance. So every application at Department of Commerce and other agencies will look very similar to this, and it will have the information that you will need to fill in. This essentially is a cover sheet for your grant proposal, and the key pieces. And David, if you could scroll, yeah, just not too quick, but yeah, you keep going. Again, this is high-level information. Keep going a bit more. There are a couple of text boxes there that here, if you want to look at, stop right there in the applicant's project. That's an important box as far as a paragraph that's used in many systems. If you're awarded a grant, that kind of paragraph description of your project is, like I said, often used. And then the last page on this is really important, is the applicant certification, and so that has to be signed by an authorized representative. And so again, those 4 or 5 pages, that should be the first thing of your application. Okay, so David, as long as we're in here, we might as well go to the budget application, the actual budget, uniform budget template. So also on the NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity portal, there is the standard budget template, and I will. I would say that I understand that this is a challenging document, okay? So if you are brand new to state funding applications, yeah, I would definitely have that conversation this week with your financial folks. You know, the intent of this template was from the Office of Management and Budget to standardize budgets across agencies, and so there is a lot of give and take as it relates to how it's all laid out. You know, I would just you know, again, point out that it does look daunting. I would say take this in manageable chunks. Start with this first tab here, which is the general instructions. It kind of outlines how you should walk through this. I'm not going to do that right now, but essentially it highlights that there are you know, more than 25 tabs that you can utilize. For each budget line item, there is a tab, okay, and we'll walk through that in a minute. But this first tab is the general instructions. David, if you could scroll down a bit, I think to section C or D. And as you're scrolling, I'll just mention you know, Part A is the, you know, kind of the overall budget. Part B is the is a summary of the state of Illinois funds. Part C is the budget worksheets and narrative. Those are those multiple tabs, and keep going down there. Okay, so section C is really the budget line item definitions. Okay, so if you want to know, you know, what's the definitions of the budget lines that can be used, it's in this section C. All of the first 14 budget lines or so, and David, if you could just slowly scroll down, are the standard budget lines that you're going to see in any state grant application. As you get into the budget lines that start at 1012, oh, I'm sorry, nope, keep going. I'm sorry, it's the 1510. So lines that start in the 15s, those are specific to this apprenticeship grant program, right? So all your other costs, like your staff, your benefits, your travel, all those are pretty standard in operating a program. These other costs, these line 1510, 1520, 1530, these are really specific to this apprenticeship expansion program. And it's important to note that these grayed out lines here, they all roll up, quote unquote, into a budget line, okay? So for instance, we have line 1520, work-based training, okay? So this includes training that occurs in the workplace, right? So we're talking about on-the-job training, we're talking about customized training, we're talking about work experiences and internships, transitional jobs, and incumbent worker training. Now, in many of the, you may not use all or any of those categories. The idea here is if your project, you know, had on-the-job training, you'd be able to, let's say, put, you know, $20,000 in on-the-job training, and if you wanted to provide, you know, $50,000 in incumbent worker training, your total line item would roll up to be $70,000 in the budget line 1520. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility in moving, you know, funds around within an overall training line, because we know that, you know, from time to time you may need to make those adjustments.
Hey, John, can I ask a budget quick question? So something that's really common is people either neglect or they don't know how to put in, and we made mention of this so many times before earlier in the presentation, to put in leveraged or matching funds.
Right, and so and we'll show that. And so David, I want to just show, if you can click on to the Section A tab. And so this is a summary. So these are if you look towards the top where it says on row 4, Section A, State of Illinois funds, okay? So this is a summary of all of those standard budget lines, okay? And the way that you input that, and David, if you can go and click on the Personnel tab. Okay, so this is the tab. This is the tab, and there's a tab for each one of the budget line items, right? So you would put at the top, there is a space for the direct grant costs. And David, if you can scroll down, let's see here. I'm not. I see. Okay. So at the just checking here. So within each of these budget line worksheets, there is a place for the state costs and a place for the matching costs. And I'm going to just need to double check these. I'm not, the screen that I'm seeing is that there are lines here for the narrative. Oh, I see, there it is. It's not as easy to tell. So if you look at row 7, you can see like that's where you could type in a grant cost. If you look at row, I believe it's 12 and 13. Those are the non-state totals. So that's where you would enter your matching funds there. Okay. So again, I'm sorry I can't see it very well on the screen, but there is that narrative box underneath. So the proposed narrative for the state-related costs and the non-state. So again, that's match or other funded listed for each of those budget line items. And David, if you could click on the Section A tab again. And so that tab, again, just shows this is a summary of all of those state-related costs. David, if you can click on tab B, you can see that although we haven't put in an example, so Section B shows all of the non-state costs. So that's where your match would show, and those entries, those budget line item tabs will populate automatically to these summary sheets. Okay. David, if you could click on, I believe it's the ICI tab. So this is another spot where you should identify where your indirect cost rate is for the project, and that should be consistent with the cost rate that you select on the system, on the Office of Management and Budget system. Again, there's more information that we can provide on the FAQs for the budget. I know that especially those who haven't used this budget template, it can be daunting, and we can provide you with some technical assistance as you work through the tabs of this when you're to that point. But again, my advice for you is to get this template over to your budget folks as soon as possible so they can start with tab A, make sure they read that and all the instructions and understand what the budget line items look like. And then at the same time, from a program standpoint, you guys should be looking at developing, that narrative, that strong budget narrative for that part of your proposal. So with that, David, I think I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation and go ahead to the next slide. We're going to go pretty quickly here because we've just covered a lot of this. General rules are all applicable. These are federal rules that get passed down to all state projects now. You have to meet the allowability components. They must be necessary and reasonable. You have to treat the cost consistently, so you can't just because it's a state grant, you can't charge the state twice what you charge others for doing the same thing or providing the same service. And you obviously have to make sure that you adequately document your costs. Next slide, please. They must be reasonable, right? So if again, you have to, a reasonable person would identify your expenditures as within lines and within restraints. So, just as we all treat our own budget, our own pocketbook with restraint, the expectation is the same with these grant funds. Next slide, please. And allocable. So the cost has to be allocable to the federal award. So it has to, the benefits of the award, should be clearly documented, especially if you are using leverage or matching funds. And this is also important as you look at, some of those indirect and overhead cost considerations. But again, more information is included in our indirect trainings. Next slide, please. So again, this is part of that indirect. There is program costs, there's administrative costs, and both of these can be direct and indirect. And here is the direct link for a module that goes directly into an indirect cost training. Next slide, please. More information about those indirect costs. Next slide. Uniform budget template, as I just outlined. So Section A is for those grant funds. Provides that summary that is automatically populated when you go in to those specific budget lines. Don't try to punch in numbers into that Section A tab because they won't populate. Same thing with Section B. You have to make sure you go to the personnel line, and then you have to go to the benefits line, and that information will automatically calculate up to the Section A and Section B respectively based on the information you provided. There is a certification page within that template. It's another tab. Make sure, again, your budget folks are reviewing that, and that is also signed with your proposal. We ask that you provide the electronic version of your budget proposal. So give us the Excel file. Send that in as a separate file, but go ahead and the page that verifies that your fiscal person has reviewed this budget for accuracy, that signature can be provided as a PDF with the rest of your proposal. But bottom line, send the Excel file as part of your proposal submission. Next slide. Uniform budget template. Again, we've kind of gone through this. There is one great outline item, and that is construction grants. These grant funds are not allowed for construction. And then the budget line items in lines 15 are the program-specific line items. And again, those are primarily those training activities, and then also some of the other navigator activities that don't fall in the other standard budget line item categories. Should also note within the budget line, within the template, there is a worksheet that also asks you to outline your contracts as well, and that's really more for the indirect cost calculations, and we can provide assistance if you have questions about that as well. Next slide, please.
John, can you clarify that construction comment again? So you're saying these funds cannot be used on construction at all?
Correct. No construction is allowed.
Construction apprenticeship program.
Right. So we're not building.
Program.
Right. This is not a right. So if it's in the building and trades, awesome. We'd want to see your applications. But if you are like asking for building, if you're looking for concrete costs and steel costs, don't come to this application.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that.
Right. Now, if there are minor supplies that fall within the definitions of supplies for a project, that could be allowable if it's necessary, if it meets those three: reasonable, allowable, allocable to the grant. Okay, next slide, please. The indirect cost, again, I think we've beaten this, that you must select both on the indirect cost system from the Office of Management Budget, and then also make that selection on, it's called the ICI tab of the standard budget form. Next slide. Section B for matching funds. For all federal awards, any shared costs and those contributions should be documented, but they have to meet the same requirements, okay? So if you are going to submit matching costs, make sure that you are going to be prepared to track that. Because if you just do a throwaway and say, well, this program is leveraged by, a $2 million initiative of X, Y, and Z, and you're not able to break that out in the budget, the magnitude of that is going to be diminished because you're not able to clearly document how that match will be tracked. Match, if you include it, and it's included in an award, has to meet the same allowability standards. You have to track it. You have to report on it. So there's some significant considerations as you identify those matching funds. Match is not required, however, it is encouraged, as Patrick, I'm sure, has talked about. Next slide. I should also note that costs that are from other federal government sources, right? So kind of the middle of the page there, federal government grants that support this initiative are actually characterized properly as leveraged costs, okay? So in your budget narrative, there isn't like a separate tab, because we would have had to add like a whole other tab, and there's issues around that. So if you have leveraged costs in that narrative section, both in your narrative analysis for your technical proposal and also in the uniform budget template, there are narrative boxes that we showed. Make sure that you identify that this is leverage funds, okay? Leverage funds are accepted, and we want to see how this program is, connecting to other federal programs, and just as long as you identify that. All right, next slide. All right, so the next couple of slides really just go through, kind of article by article of the Uniform Grant Agreement. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but it's important for you to have them, and also note that your legal office or your executive directors, if you're interested in seeing the boilerplate grant agreement, we can probably arrange that to either be posted or provided to you upon request. These are the standard terms and conditions that every state award is required to include but also know that you know, all the things that are included in the notice of funding opportunity, the things that I've very briefly talked about, it will be important that you know, administering a state grant is, especially with federal funds, is a significant undertaking, and rest assured, the grant agreement has all of the legal provisions of, you know, 30 to 45 pages of outlining all of your requirements that you're signing up for, including monitoring and reporting and you know, everything that goes with it. So again, we want you to walk into this with eyes wide open. We want to be partners with you, but also just point out the realities of you know, what you're required to do. Next slide, please. Again, some of the other provisions, you can read those on your own. Next slide. Grant agreement. These are exhibits. So these are exhibits that we will pull out of your technical proposal. So again, we look at the project descriptions, the deliverables in that attachment 2, the payment provisions, the contact information, performance standards, and then any special conditions. And our special conditions are significant because these are federal funds, and so we probably have about 5 or 6 pages of federal conditions that go on top of the regular state awards. Next slide, please. Next slide. Here are some of the resources that I referred to. I would definitely encourage you to check those out, work with your teams. If you have technical questions, check out our FAQs. If you have issues with budgets, you know, again, certainly as you dig into these, we can be a resource. Don't wait till the last minute because you know, there's you know, we can provide assistance, but we're not gonna do your budget for you. Right. And we may do a special webinar just on the budget, because I know, again, that these are very technical in nature, and we want to make sure that the information is out there, and we do recognize that it can be a barrier for a proposal. I want to point out that your proposal will not be downgraded because of like a budget technicality. That is one of the key reasons that we included the budget narrative as part of your technical proposal, but rest assured, we will have to have that, you will have to have all of the information as we review your proposals.
Right, but that's why you should start early on this. Do not wait until the last minute, because there is a potential that if you leave out a major component, your application could be rejected from the beginning. So when it goes through accountability and they're looking at, you know, what are the necessary components that needed to be submitted for this grant application by the date and time that it was submitted, you know, don't leave a section out thinking, well, I'll submit it later and just get this in. You know, that's why we're doing this early. We're giving the 45 days, and we want you guys to. John, before you go, is there anything that you could note that you know, does seem to cause, besides the budget pages, a particular problem that you've seen that you'd like to talk about?
I think that it's just from a technical standpoint, not including a narrative explanation of what the cost is. So you'll note as you get into the budget template that each of those line items has a separate tab, and there is a narrative box there. And it is common that individuals don't recognize that that is something that they need to fill out. And then also within those budgets, just being too generalized and not providing enough information to describe actually what you propose. So you just put like a huge number there and then just put training. Okay, so we need a little more information about that. But again, I think that having that initial component within the technical proposal is very helpful now, and hopefully will alleviate some of that kind of qualitative piece around this. our budget office, our accounting office actually, if you are to enter into a grant, will review this budget template. And I can almost guarantee every single budget template will probably come back with some technical adjustment, and that's okay. And again, it's not a disqualifier, but you need to present your best budget and absolutely take advantage of that opportunity in the narrative section of your technical proposal.